This is China holding its largest ever military parade in a show of growing firepower and geopolitical clout as President Xi casts Beijing, or certainly tries to, as the effective custodian of a post-US international order, perhaps a new world order. On display will be combat-ready weaponry in this highly choreographed Victory Day spectacle. It's called a Victory Day spectacle because it commemorates 80 years since Japan was defeated in the Second World War. And you saw there some dates, 1945 to 2025. The Chinese call it the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. Interestingly, the people who are attending are the focus. Kim Jong from North Korea and Russia's President Vladimir Putin. It has been shunned largely by Western leaders. In fact, the only countries represented are Serbia and Slovakia. More than 50,000 spectators are gathered in Tiananmen Square, expected to see aerial displays, marching platoons of the People's Liberation Army, as well as, I mentioned, this cutting-edge military equipment. You can see the leaders there. There are 26 world leaders at this event, and we will look closely for Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. Let us just take in some of the sounds there. There is Xi Jinping giving a wave to the crowds there, and other dignitaries assembled too. Let's just have a look at some of these images. And a very good morning to you from Sky News. This is Nick Qureshi in London. It is 2 a.m. in the UK, and these are pictures in China, which is hosting a huge military parade. You can see there Xi Jinping and on the left, Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, also joined by Kim Jong of North Korea. This is Beijing's largest ever military parade. Ideally, the Chinese would say, in a show of its growing firepower and geopolitical clout, as President Xi casts, or certainly seeks to cast, Beijing as the custodian of a post-US international order. Very interesting that the leaders of Russia, North Korea and Iran there. It is an attempt to show China's military might for what might come next in this highly choreographed Victory Day spectacle. Victory Day because it marks 80 years since Japan was defeated in the Second World War, in what the Chinese say is a war of resistance against Japanese aggression. There is President Xi, and you can see behind him there Vladimir Putin meeting a number of dignitaries. 26 world leaders are at this event in Tiananmen Square. We are expected to hear from the Chinese leader. Interesting, hardly any Western leader is there, apart from those from Serbia and Slovakia. So as we take in the sights and sounds there, there's President Xi giving a wave to the faithful. Let us get some reaction and what we might expect from this important day. Joining us is Philip Shetler-Jones, Senior Research Fellow in Indo-Pacific Security at the Royal United Services Institute. It's very good to have you on the programme in this early hour. Well, never really seen anything like it, have we?
No, that's right. This is very unusual and obviously grand. The last time we saw a spectacle on this scale was probably the Olympic Games hosted by China. So it is quite remarkable that this is the way that the leadership in China has chosen to mark this occasion. But even more exceptional is the way that Xi Jinping is accompanied in person by not just one but two of their main allies and partners. Xi Jinping has invited Vladimir Putin and the leader of North Korea as well, Kim Jong
How important and significant is this to have the three together?
Well, it signifies what's been developing really over the last 5 years, particularly since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, which is a strategic alignment between Russia and North Korea, between Russia and China. But now this is really new thing is that the three are brought together, because there was always some speculation that China wasn't particularly happy with Russia and North Korea lining up. And so this really endorses the idea that there can be a meaningful partnership between the three.
And when we talk about a meaningful partnership, in what way, what fashion, where does this go?
Well, at the moment, it's the partnership between North Korea and Russia, which has involved not just the supply of munitions for Russia's war in Ukraine, but also North Korean soldiers fighting and dying, coming back in coffins to North Korea. The Russia-China partnership, of course, was developed since 2021, and that's also taken the form of something more like collective security arrangement. But the missing piece, if you like, in the puzzle, which we still don't know about, is what does this mean for the China-North Korea part of the arrangement? So far, it's clearly ceremonial, but no substantive announcements have been made about a change in the nature of that relationship.
we are watching the scenes, aren't we, as this gets underway. And I'm wondering what other nations might make of this spectacle. Perhaps the United States. Interesting, isn't it, that hardly any Western leader is at this event?
Yes, I think people will understand this event through the lens of recent messaging or propaganda, if you like, coming from China and Russia, which is very much putting in the center of their understanding of world affairs the idea that the West is declining, the East is rising, that we're at a turning point in history, changes unseen for a century, as they like to term it. And I suppose this is a classic case where a memory of the end of World War II is being deployed to reinforce that narrative. The idea that the last time these countries fought together and stood together, they opened the new era of the post-1945 order. And so this is a narrative obviously wide open to question and much criticized for reasons including, well, number one, Russia and Japan had a non-aggression pact until the Americans dropped the atom bombs on Japan, and then Russia attacked Japan in violation of that pact. And number two, the Communist Party, currently ruling China, really didn't take part very much in the fighting against Japan in World War II. That was led by the Republican nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek for most of the war. So it's certainly a lot of myth-making rather than history as we would know it.
And where does this myth-making go from here? Is it some kind of effort to preserve or to look at a new world order? I think we can see some pictures of President Xi there. What is he hoping to achieve on a global scale?
Well, I think what Xi Jinping is the same for Putin and Putin. A lot of this isn't about the message to the world, but the message to their own people. And there is a sort of of this war in the Chinese, which is that before the war, China was in disarray through corruption and really parts of China going their own way. And that's what made it so weak as to be preyed upon by the West. And so in a way, the war is the point where that ended, and it produced the rule eventually of the Communist Party in 1949. And so the Communist Party is the only force in Chinese politics which is able to bring the country together and make it resistant against attempts by the West and the outside world to colonize it, to exploit it. They talk about the century of humiliation, which lasted up until the arrival of the Communist Party. So this is an attempt to conflate the arrival of the Communist Party with the end of a period of humiliation in China.
Mr. Shelley, we'll have to interrupt you there because we are actually hearing from President Xi. Let's just listen in now.
International organizations, dear guests, all the officers and soldiers, comrades, friends, today we gather together in memory of the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese against Japanese aggression war and the world anti-fascist war. In memory of our martyrs, on behalf of the Central Committee of the Party, National Congress, the State Council, National Committee of the Political Consultative Conference, and the Central Military Commission, I pay my highest respect to the veterans, the veteran comrades who have made contributions to the victory, and also patriots and generals who participated in the war resistance against Japanese aggression, and to the people and the foreign governments and officials and the soldiers who supported China. And also welcome the distinguished guests. Comrades, friends, the Chinese People's War of Resistance is a great war with the initiation of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese people fought heroically and won the war. Facing the invaders, we defeated the Japanese military invaders for the first time in history. And it is a part of our important part of our history. And we made our contribution to saving the people, defending peace, and ensured victory. All the countries and the nations should look after each other and help each other. Then we can avoid the repetition of the tragedy. Comrades and friends, the Chinese nation is a self-reliant, independent nation. In facing of the opposition of light and darkness, the Chinese people raised itself and fought for the regeneration of the Chinese nation. Today, mankind is facing the reality of war or peace, cooperation or confrontation, win-win or zero-sum. The Chinese people are on the side of the right, justice, and progress. We will build the common community of shared future with mankind. We are reliable.
It'll be a short upsum.
We will celebrate and we will accelerate our development and defend our national integrity and sovereignty. And to achieve the regeneration of the Chinese nation and defend the peace of the world and to make our contributions. History carries the past and looks toward the future. Our people will under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, uphold Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, three representative thought, scientific development theory, and the socialist thought of the new era. Will stick to the socialist road and promoting the great anti-war, anti-Japanese war spirit to move forward to make our country to a stronger and more prosperous country. The great regeneration of China is irresistible. Our course will prevail. The parade starts.
Well, there you go, a lot of pomp going on in China, something very carefully choreographed, isn't it? As we heard from President Xi Jinping. Didn't speak for very long, but key things. He said it's important that nations look after each other and help each other out, avoid repetition of tragedy. Just to remind you, this military parade marks the 80th anniversary of victory over Japan in 1945, what the Chinese call the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. He talked about importance that history doesn't repeat itself, and talking about China needing to be a stronger country, and leading to the parade. Now you can see there all this hardware and equipment is going to be on display, perhaps in bigger order than it has been in recent years. 50,000 odd spectators in Tiananmen Square watching this spectacle. Let's talk, shall we, once again to Philip Shetler-Jones from RUSI. You're giving me your thoughts now. So we have heard from President Xi. It wasn't very long, but what stood out to you from what he had to say? I mean, he did talk about the past and let's not forget what this parade effectively marks, the 80th anniversary of victory over Japan. But he was keen, although he didn't mention any countries or anyone in particular, but mentioned too about the future.
Yes, I was struck there by the irony of President Xi sitting alongside President Putin when, if you think back to the war that started against China in the 1930s, and Japan invaded China and treated it very much in the same way Russia is treating Ukraine today. Territory was seized, puppet leaders were set up. The Japanese didn't want to call it a war for fear of triggering sanctions, so it was called an incident, rather in the way President Putin talks about a special military operation in Ukraine. And like the war in Ukraine, although Japan succeeded in taking a large amount of Chinese territory, their puppet leader wasn't widely recognized, and the actual leader of China, the nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek, continued to lead the resistance with outside support from the Europeans and the Americans. And eventually the Imperial Japanese Army failed to achieve their objective of subjugating China. And it was really out of frustration with that they had to strike out in 1941 in Pearl Harbor and in Southeast Asia. So Ukraine in today's situation is in very much the same place that China was in 1937. But of course, you wouldn't think that looking at President Xi sitting next to President Putin.
We'll explore that in a moment. I just want to bring our viewers, perhaps no surprise, that Donald Trump has posted already on Truth Social. He had said, hadn't he, a few hours ago that China needs America more than the US needs China. Well, this is what he has had to say on Truth Social, on his platform, following that speech by President Xi. The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans, Trump goes on to say, died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they are rightly honoured and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give, he concludes, my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. I wonder, that's very telling, isn't it, that last line there, what he perhaps means by that?
Yeah, well, it's certainly the case in that short speech President Xi gave. He emphasized the self-reliance of China. So there wasn't an acknowledgement of the large assistance that China received to resist Japan. That's not always the case. In the period leading up to this occasion, there have been a lot of commemorations of the Air Force, Army Air Force Regiment, the Flying Tigers, who flew out of what's now Burma, escorting and supporting supplies into China. And so that's something that is acknowledged by the current Chinese government. But yeah, by and large, today seems very much a celebration of victory. This is also a great contrast with the way the occasion's been marked in the West, which is more on the theme of reconciliation. We just had Royal Navy aircraft carrier Prince of Wales in Japan, and there were services of commemoration. Our Minister of Defence, Mr. Healy, laid a wreath alongside the Japanese Minister of Defence, commemorating both our losses, so that the message is entirely a different one, which is of reconciliation, whereas here, as we see, it's really a celebration of military power.
And President Xi referred to as distinguished guests. I think 26 world leaders were in attendance, of course, including Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. Will these leaders have readily accepted their invitations? I mean, they have been there. There had been this summit a few days ago. Would they have been keen to be seen next to the Chinese president?
I think so. And that may be partly because they see it in their country's interest to further strengthen their relations with the PRC. So in some cases, it may be also because they see this as an opportunity to send a message to Washington, D.C. and to the American people that they have other options, they have other choices of friends and partners in the world. And today is a case where you hear the word multipolarity thrown around a lot. And I think this is a theme of the multipolarity theory, that nowadays there is no one dominant country, and you can pursue relations on both sides of this confrontation with China, but equally with the United States, and perhaps play one off against the other for advantage.
Would Washington be rattled by this sight of these three leaders? How will the world or the West react?
Just in the meeting of the three leaders meeting this way, the meeting is obviously symbolically quite striking, but thus far we haven't seen any substantive agreements or arrangements come out of it, as you might get from a summit meeting where you have a new form of cooperation or institutions being announced. So it may just be a one-off. It's too early to say, but I think one aspect of this will be received with some discomfort in Washington, because President Trump himself tried to organize a military parade, which was rather a damp squib and was on a very small scale and was widely mocked for the standard of marching and drill and so on. So it will probably be quite a painful sight for Donald Trump to observe a much, much larger scale and more tightly choreographed event here.
All right, we'll come back to you in a moment. Let's just watch some of what's going on through Tiananmen Square. Here is President Xi being driven past all this hardware and military equipment and the vehicles used for combat.
同志们好！ 同志们辛苦了！
we are. I was watching the Victory Day parade, as it's called, in Beijing, China, marking the 80th anniversary that Japan was defeated in the Second World War. We heard from President Xi, a brief address, it has to be said, by remembering the victims of the war, and called for the eradication of the roots of the war to prevent history from repeating itself. That ceremony itself began with an 80-gun artillery salute, marking those 80 years since the end of the war. It was followed by the national anthem, the March of the Volunteers, which was composed in 1935 during the early years of resistance against invading Japanese forces. Let's return to our guest, Senior Research Fellow in Indo-Pacific Security at RUSI, Philip Shetler-Jones. You've been watching this along with us as he gives a wave, President Xi, to the military as they exalt and salute him. They look as if they're all at one together, don't they, according to this very carefully choreographed spectacle?
Yes, I found that interesting as well because, of course, the scale of the Chinese military has been built up enormously under the rule of Xi Jinping, and its modernization has been a very strong priority. As you can see from some of the very cutting-edge equipment there, some of the drones and miniature submarines and so on. This is clearly a much more modern military than the one that was there when Xi came into power. But at the same time, as it's grown bigger, the corruption problems in the military have grown with it. And Xi Jinping has dismissed a large number of senior figures in the People's Liberation Army. And in some cases, people have not been replaced in their positions. And this has led to a lot of speculation about what's going on with the relationship between the military and the government in China. Is there a lack of trust? Is there a concern about loyalty of the military? And so this very personalized presentation of Xi Jinping taking the salute from massed ranks of different branches of the military seems quite significant. Instead of having the whole parade roll in front of Xi and guests, we had Xi rolling by them personally, very much the center of attention, to quite robotic chants and slogans. So it certainly appears to intend to give an image of the Chinese military, which is very well organized, modern, disciplined, but most of all loyal to one man. And this will feed further some concerns that Xi Jinping has really achieved a kind of cult of personality, or at least he's made that the default format for these kind of representations of the relationship of the state and the military.
So if that's the perception, what is the reality?
Well, I think the reality is actually, in some ways, there's been a bit of decentralization going on in some of the arrangements of government. Now, it may be that the military is the exception to that. And remember, of course, in the case of China, this is not a military for the nation. This is the military of the party. And so it's there to serve the party. And that's something that we all remember from an earlier event that took place on Tiananmen Square, where the People's Liberation Army gunned down scores, hundreds, thousands of civilian protesters because they represented a threat to the party. So that's the principal purpose of the PLA, is to defend the party against any challenge, and that could come from the Chinese people or
I'm interested in pursuing that. So we see all this military might. You say there it's changed since Xi came into power. It's likely to change again, given the fact that he's going to be president for life, as we know. What do you feel might it be used for? Where will this be deployed, potentially? Crucially, as I mentioned during that speech, there was no mention of individual countries apart from China and Japan. Taiwan high on the agenda. He's never going to have addressed that, was he?
Well, on the question of president for life, that probably would not be the way that it would be put officially on the Chinese side. That's certainly true that Xi Jinping brought about a change in the rules for term limits and allowed himself an extension beyond that which was normal. And so in theory, he could go on for life, but that's certainly not decided conclusively at this stage. But as to the question about where this military instrument could be aimed, I agree with you completely. Taiwan is really the top priority, and Xi Jinping's made that clear repeatedly, that the PLA needs to be ready, if necessary, if called on, to resolve the Taiwan situation by force, by invading the island. And as part of that, keeping at bay any kind of support from the United States or others to Taiwan. So a lot of the modernization of the PLA has been decided around that scenario. And that's why here we can see jets, modern fifth generation jets, which would be exactly the kind of capability you'd need to stop America coming in and joining a battle over Taiwan.
Given what we've just referred to, is the PLA ready for battle, ready for such a conflict? I mean, woe betide anyone that steps out of line, put it like that.
A full-scale invasion of Taiwan that effectively take control of the island in a short period of time is hugely challenging, mainly because you need to get a very large number of soldiers across the Taiwan Strait and onto the beach, then off the beach and into the island's interior. And that's just a huge logistical problem which would struggle, I think, now to defeat the sort of air defenses and sea defenses that Taiwan has. And it's a moving target in the sense that Taiwan is itself making great efforts at the moment to increase its defensive capabilities. So at this stage, conventional invasion of Taiwan would be highly risky for the Chinese military. And then there's a question about how quickly the Americans would come in. And at the moment, President Trump is fond of claiming that Xi Jinping has told him that he won't attempt such an operation as long as President Trump is in office. So I think by implication, President Trump believes that the US is effectively deterring China.
Well, that's what President Trump has to say. How important is it then for President Xi to have these two leaders in Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un by his side for what comes next? Could they influence the next steps?
Well, it's operation in North Korea would be hugely complicating for the United States to come in and defend Taiwan. Of course, a lot of the US deployable force in the region is based on Japan, and Japan has already been ranged by North Korean ballistic missiles. The Russians are also deploying new equipment to the islands to the north of Japan and the parts of Russia to the north of Japan, which could, by themselves or in collaboration with the Chinese military, pose a huge threat to American forces, either on Japan or trying to cross the Pacific and come into the theater. So, yes, in Japan particularly, people are quite mindful that there are joint exercises between Chinese and Russian forces using nuclear-capable bombers, ships, and more recently submarines around the Sea of Okhotsk. So I think the intention there is to imply that if it came to a full-scale conflict involving the United States, then China would expect to have a collaboration with certainly Russia and perhaps North Korea as well.
I'm just going to tell our viewers there's a little occasional sound issue when you're giving your responses right at the start, but we certainly get the gist of what you're saying. Let me just repeat what President Trump has put out on Truth Social. We haven't seen him for a long time, have we? We did see him a little earlier today when he said that China was needed the US more than they needed China. And we can see on the screen now, this is what he has posted on Truth Social in the last few minutes. Let me read it out. The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory capitalised there. I hope that they are rightfully honoured and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. And he concludes, please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. And that's very cutting final few words, his warmest regards to these two. How rattled will Donald Trump be by having Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin and the leader of Iran effectively by President Xi's side?
I would guess President Trump personally feels unhappy to be left out in some way. And whenever the world's attention is focused on something, and that's not Donald Trump, then he's probably unsatisfied with that. So this is just the sort of parade and spectacle that he appears to like himself a great deal. So perhaps some of the tone of the tweet is an expression of frustration that he's out of sight, and as you say, has been out of sight for the last week or so. Whereas, I mean, this is a very clearly magnetic image of military power and alignment between, the three countries that, in different ways, he, as a leader of the United States, is trying to appeal to. He's had his meeting with President Putin. He's sought meetings with Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, but so far hasn't got a date. So he's probably feeling that he needs to try and say something to remind everybody that he's still there. And perhaps he's getting a little bit insecure that people are not agreeing to meet with him yet.
Interesting, isn't it, that the Russian leader has referred to the Chinese president as a dear friend. I think they've increased gas exports. Putin talking about relations at an unprecedentedly high level between those two countries, Russia and China. How, as we speak now, in your opinion, are relations between Washington and Beijing?
I think relations are perhaps moving more towards a kind of equilibrium, possibly. The tariffs that Trump announced earlier on have been delayed, and work appears to be going on behind the scenes diplomatically to try and set up a bilateral meeting between President Xi and President Trump. So there have been other signs. For example, there was a plan for President of Taiwan to pass through cities in the United States, which were cancelled, and there was quite a lot of comment to the effect that this was done out of a concern not to disturb the preparations for that bilateral Xi-Trump meeting. So that, to me, indicates that certainly on the US side, they're looking for a meeting, they're looking for a chance to do a deal. They're willing to make perhaps small concessions to make that easier for China to agree to. But China apparently is in no hurry, perhaps enjoying a moment where they feel they've weathered the threats of US economic pressure. They've weathered other kinds of attempts to get other countries to put pressure on China. And so, for now at least, they're in no rush. And now is a day to show China's independence, really, and leadership of another bloc of considerable military, economic, and resource power.
And indeed, let's just watch some more of this parade and hear some of the sounds, all in front of President Xi. Well, plenty to see there, isn't there, at this victory parade organised in Tiananmen Square, and to mark the 80th anniversary of victory over Japan. Notably, this year, two key world leaders are there. President Putin of Russia and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Let us return to our guest, Philip Shetler-Jones from RUSI, Senior Research Fellow in Indo-Pacific Security. We know that President Xi, which we might look at in a moment, has talked about this global governance initiative. But what are these two other leaders going to get out of being there? How significant is it from their perspective to be in Beijing right now?
Well, the one I think that's really interesting is the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, because the country has been under quite a great degree of isolation for his term in power and that of his predecessors. And he has ventured outside the country in the past, but normally only for bilateral meetings and then under rather careful conditions. He travels by armored train, as he did on this occasion, rather than flying, I suppose out of concern for his security, but perhaps a bit of prestige as well. Armored trains hark back to the style and the era of his ancestors, on whom he slightly leans for the prestige of the dynastic legitimacy. But I think his participation in this event at 3 with President Putin and President Xi by his side is something of a breakthrough for him. And perhaps he has the confidence now, having achieved a degree of greater stability in North Korea with assistance from Russia, economic assistance as well as military technical assistance, such that he now feels that he can go into a new era as an international figure. And perhaps this will be the beginning of him participating in more international meetings. He's sent ministers in the past to regional groupings of which North Korea is either a member or some sort of associate or observer. But this is really a rarity for him. So I think that's really one of the most interesting things about this event.
And we know that Putin has come up with an energy deal. He has been in China for a few days, attending that summit too. I wanted to ask you, notably, nearly every Western leader isn't there, with the exception of Serbia's Alexander Vučić and Slovakia's Robert Fico. Why so? Why are they there and others aren't?
Well, perhaps on the European leaders' side, this is an opportunity for them to show their independence and that they're not obliged to follow a Brussels common line or a transatlantic common line. And they have agency as countries. And if they want to pursue relations with Russia and with China, then that's really up to them. And they would say they're doing it for the benefit of their population. And this is a good way of demonstrating that. For Vladimir Putin, I think perhaps he's coming off quite a successful period of recent diplomacy. He met Donald Trump, appeared to give no concessions whatsoever in the meeting in Alaska, and the fighting in Ukraine continues. So he doesn't seem to be under huge pressure internationally, certainly not from the United States. So perhaps that strengthened his hand in negotiations with China over opening greater capacity for energy transition to China. And so perhaps that's been part of what's allowed them to come to a deal on that, because that's been something I think Russia's been trying to get for a while.
And when we talk about a new global order or a global order, what does that mean? Is that really standing up to the United States, or is it a different way of going about things?
Well, on the surface, when you look at the language, a lot of it looks just like regurgitation of existing language in the UN Charter and other international agreements. But perhaps it's important to look closer, that there are points that are omitted in that. Of course, human rights doesn't really have a part in it. And the whole idea of universal values is something that China and Russia agree is not really a correct part of international order. So I don't think they want to overturn the existing order completely. They, I think, prefer rather to pick and choose the bits that suit them, position themselves in a more central role as the leaders of that order, and sideline the United States and its allies. And that's really, I think, connected to this other principle they promote, which is multipolarity, which really means a world where US power is just that much less important, and other countries with great power, like China and Russia, can play what they would see as their rightful role in leading other countries. And that's with this idea of the global south in mind as well, that the global south really would be much better off in their eyes following their example and not following a declining Western model.
And when you talk about sidelining the United States, anything specific in, you mentioned there the global south, is that to do with it, or in the economic spheres or military action? Give me a more general overview of where they're keen on perhaps sidelining Washington.
Well, one thing that is often discussed in meetings of the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, so these groupings led by China and Russia mainly, is establishing a non-US dollar system of international financial transactions and investment. And so I think the dollar system is certainly one area they'd like to sideline or displace US power. And that's partly because the US will use the dollar system through sanctions to put political pressure on countries. And that's something which is most unwelcome, obviously, for Russia under sanctions, but also China doesn't want to be the object of secondary sanctions concerning Russia. I know you can see from the experience that India has now with tariffs as well, that perhaps they're also inclined to see some benefits in a global economic system that isn't really as closely linked to the dollar as what we have now.
And is any of this achievable, an alternative to the dollar? What would that represent?
Well, I think it's not the way, just that its importance for the world economy might decline. But the problem with implementing this is that there isn't really another currency that China can offer or Russia can offer that can rival the dollar. And there isn't an investment system under rule of law in China or Russia where people would feel comfortable putting their money. In the end, China and Russia don't operate under the rule of law. And so whatever investment you've got there or whatever value you have in Chinese currency isn't really yours to control. It's in the control of the party or the state in the case of Russia. So I think that is a major impediment in a program to dethrone the dollar, is that people don't really trust the governments of China and Russia with their money.
Mr. Shatner-Jones, while we're looking at these pictures, just give us an overview. You say that all this military might has changed and strengthened since President Xi came to power. What are we looking at, and where might all this be used?
Well, one of the things we're looking at, and these pictures are being provided to you by the Chinese authorities, so they're choosing what we see to some extent. Correct me if I'm wrong. But a lot of what we're seeing is types of military equipment that are quite familiar to us in the West from our own modernization. So you see a lot of drones, you see autonomous systems, you see systems designed to launch explosives onto targets from a distance. And this is all quite familiar stuff, I would say. Some of the Chinese technology in the very, very high-speed munitions, so-called hypersonics, is considered very, very high-end, and in some cases above that available to Western militaries. So people specializing in the equipment side will be paying very close attention to some of this equipment. Some of it they may be seeing for the first time.
Yeah, let's just watch a few more of these pictures and hear some of the sounds as... OK, so reminding you, this is the Victory Day parade in China to mark the 80th anniversary of victory over Japan, the war of resistance, as the Chinese call it, against Japanese aggression. Our guest is Philip Sheckler-Jones from RUSI. What are we seeing? Some of this, I mean, China will have us all believe some incredible equipment here, and it certainly looks there as an arena of military hardware here.
Yes, it's obviously designed to be impressive, and a lot of it is what looks like quite new modern equipment. Some of it is quite conventional stuff that's familiar, but I think it's important to also note that not all of the things that we're seeing now are necessarily in current operation. It could be that some of the, for example, what look like next generation uncrewed aircraft may be still in the test phase, but by and large it's very modern stuff. It's designed to penetrate enemy air defense and get to targets at a great distance, and some of it perhaps remotely targeted, some of it with autonomous systems, so that it can get to target without receiving signals from a targeting base. So yeah, it's certainly an impressive show, and there are not many countries who could or would put on such a demonstration in this day and age. I would say, compared to Russia, for example, which is the other country that has a love for this kind of parade, I don't think the Russians will be able to put on such a show anymore.
OK, well, we've seen President Xi. This will probably wrap up fairly soon. He has ridden through the entire length of these formations, hasn't he, in that black limousine with its roof open. We'll have seen, and we'll see again, no doubt, these 4 microphones lined in front of him, and greeted the flanks of troops as he passed through between them. They saluted him. But I think, as you were mentioning before, it's worth reminding our viewers it's perhaps they're not as one as some might expect.
Well, it's true there have been a lot of reports about a large number of senior figures in the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, who've been dismissed from their post or disappeared, some of them not being replaced. So perhaps one of the benefits of this show is to counter that impression by giving a very strong image of President Xi fully in control and fully the focus of attention from the military as the commander-in-chief.
OK, well, it's certainly a spectacle, isn't it? And a lot of pomp has gone on, carefully choreographed, what we've seen for the past, what is it now, almost an hour and a half, and with that short speech from President Xi. We will let you go. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. That's Philip Sheckler-Jones from RUSI, joining us on Sky News, Senior Research Fellow in Indo-Pacific Security. Thank you for staying up and watching this with us here on Sky News. So as this carries on, it is due to culminate fairly soon. I wonder how other world leaders who weren't there will react to what's going on. A telling comment from Donald Trump on Truth Social. We haven't seen him for several days, have we? The President was out earlier, was asked about his health, but he had said that China needs America more than the Americans need China. And in a statement on Truth Social, he concluded by saying, please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. as you conspire against the United States of America. A very cutting remark there, it would seem. Let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is watching this parade and following Donald Trump's reaction. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, a rare deployment of sarcasm there by an American in the form of the American President Donald Trump at the end there. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong Un, as you conspire against the United States of America. Look, Nick, to be a fly on the wall of the White House right now, because surely President Trump is watching this. It is an extraordinary spectacle. I mean, we always knew it would be. I've been to parades like this in Beijing before. They are always incredible, but this one appears to be on another level. And I think, of course, that is entirely intentional. It's worth saying, so our viewers understand, that all these images are being brought to us by the Chinese state broadcaster. So the choreography is down to a T. I mean, I've been struck at how they've had live cameras mounted on the turrets of tanks, in the cockpits of aircraft, and they're doing the choreography as well in terms of how the pictures come out. So they are cutting between these different images. This is a Chinese display of power of the like that I don't think I have ever seen before. And of course, all of this is intentional. All of this they want to be seen everywhere around the world, not least in the White House. And so one would assume that Donald Trump is watching this. And given that he is the president that we know he is, he will be watching it, I imagine, with a large degree of envy. I mean, don't forget he had his own military parade not all that long ago in Washington, and it looked pretty pathetic compared to what we're seeing here. And that, again, is what the Chinese are trying to do. They are trying to get one up on the world's superpower, because, as your previous guest was saying, they want to prove that we are in a new world now, and that the power now lies in the East and not in the West. That is the view of the Chinese. And, you know, from the tail fin of the aircraft that we can see flying there, that is what they're trying to project.
Will Donald Trump be rattled by what he's seeing, given we know how thin-skinned he is?
Look, I mean, anyone's guess. I would say yes. I think this is the sort of thing he wants to be able to do. But you know, America can't put on a parade like this. I mean, the reason that China can get so many people together and to choreograph such a massive event is because it's not a democracy. You know, when Xi Jinping demands that this happens, it happens. And it happens at a scale that the Western world simply cannot muster. So that is why it looks so incredible. But it's not something that the West could ever, that any Western nation could ever and would ever want to emulate. But clearly, the sort of president that Donald Trump is, he likes this sort of stuff, and he'd love to have to be able to put on something like this.
Well, Mark, as we mentioned, we haven't seen Donald Trump for quite a while now. Questions about his health and what might have happened to him. Certainly, we did see him a few hours ago. On a wider perspective, when President Xi talks about global governance initiative and a world order, how might America react to that, given the fact as well that you've seen all these leaders with President Xi, the leaders of North Korea and Russia especially, as forming, some might see, as a Beijing-led alliance?
Well, I mean, look, I think the first thing to say is that we have seen Donald Trump today. I mean, yes, there were some rumours doing the rounds over the course of the past few days because he hadn't been seen for a few days. It has been a holiday weekend. He was not in front of the cameras for a few days. That naturally sparked the rumour mill. But he appeared in the Oval Office today. He looked pretty much as he always looks. So I think that's put to bed any of the crazy rumours that were doing the rounds over the course of the weekend. As for the degree of unity that we're seeing among the likes of Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Xi Jinping of China, Vladimir Putin, others as well, we've seen the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been there too, which in itself is interesting because not all that long ago Modi appeared to be close to Trump, and that relationship now appears to have fallen out, and intentionally, of course, because he is a consummate politician, Narendra Modi has now decided to poke Trump in the eye by turning up at this parade. I don't think we should overstate any sense of common purpose between these leaders. I mean, there is plenty that divides the likes of Putin and Xi and Modi, more so Modi. But it suits them right now to be seen to be united against the United States. But I don't think we should overstate any sense of common purpose. As I say, plenty of underlying disunity. It's kind of the sort of common aggrievement is against the United States. So this suits them right now. And it just so happens that it is the anniversary of the defeat of Japan, which allows them all to gather in Beijing after the summit that we saw in Tianjin. So it's kind of useful for them to be able to have this moment. And it's awkward for the West. It doesn't look great for Trump right now.
Yeah, and moreover, on the West, only two Western leaders were there. Is any significance to that? How will the West react to what it's seen? Along the lines of Donald Trump, perhaps? Or, although, let's face it, Donald Trump will perhaps react differently to others.
Look, I think one thing is certainly worth pondering, and that's that short term. I was thinking about this over the past few days, but it's certainly the case that in the final years of the Biden administration, the last couple of years of the Biden administration, it felt as though that America really was kind of a past power, and that power had shifted away from the United States. Now, Trump turned up, and for the first 6-7 months of his term, short term at least, it felt as though America was back. Everyone was forced to dance to America's tune. You know, the tariffs and all the rest of it. Suddenly, every country wanted to be in the Oval Office, wanted to be able to impress and to flatter Donald Trump. That's been the short-term sort of impact. But you have to wonder, long-term, what actually is happening. And I do wonder whether what we're getting here in Beijing is a glimpse into the future. A future where Asia is the power, and where perhaps, where's Europe going to be in the next 10, 15 years? If America is continually very, very unstable, very unpredictable, not the sort of the ally that it once was, then maybe Europe over time is going to find itself forced to look east, to look towards countries like China. I mean, that's a way down the line, but it's certainly something to think about.
All right, Mark, thank you. We have seen 80,000 peace doves released at the end of the parade, which is due to come to a conclusion now. Applause from President Xi as all the crowds assembled, waving with their flags there. Let's have a little listen into the conclusion. seen balloons released there as well as 80,000 peace doves. Let's talk to our Beijing correspondent, Helen Ann Smith. Hi there. So all this seems to have gone very well as far as President Xi is concerned, and flanked, of course, by major world leaders, not least Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, that's right. It has, whatever you might think of the politics behind this, it has been an absolutely remarkable performance. To talk about perfection really just doesn't do it justice. Every flick of the boot, every turn of the head, every cry, every moment so precisely scripted and so precisely executed. And it was really some experience to be here. We're here amongst a kind of a media area, but there are thousands of members of the public who have been selected by either their companies they work for or for a lottery to be here as well. And we've been in the stands among them. And just really quite a remarkable atmosphere to be here. It is a very, very hot day, but you could just feel the energy sort of coming off at that parade and the people watching it. The stamp of the boots kind of reverberating around when the tanks passed us, the seats we were sitting in sort of literally vibrated, the jets flying overhead. It really was a remarkable show, as I said. But look, there are so many layers to meaning here, and there is lots of different audiences that I think this is aiming to reach. Of course, partly there is the domestic China audience, and that is a very, very, very important audience. This is all about saying to the people of China that, look, 80 years ago, China might have been invaded, it might have been humiliated, but just look at it now. We are now a global superpower. We are ascendant. We are in control. Oh, and by the way, that is thanks to the Chinese Communist Party and the visionary leadership of Xi Jinping. That message is loud and clear. Just worth saying, actually, that in some of the press briefings we had ahead of this parade, the loyalty to the party was actually stated as a more important objective than commemorating the end of the war. So just a little insight into where the priorities are. But look, beyond the domestic China audience, of course, there is absolutely a global message to be listened to as well. And absolutely, they are trying to speak to leaders around the world. And the message they are trying to tell, of course, is one of Chinese power. And that is, of course, a bit about military power. And that was absolutely on show today, as you've been discussing. Sort of new grade weaponry that hasn't been seen before on display. Absolutely, that was part of it. And worth saying, too, that battle readiness, quote, is all part of this for China and was all part of what they were trying to show. But it is also, of course, about political might and political strength too. The fact that Xi Jinping can convene the leaders he has here, the fact that he can put on this type of show is all kind of part of the picture. Who is, as well as just what is on show, is every bit as important. I know this is what you've been discussing, but look, that all the way through that remarkable show of Xi Jinping, on his right, Vladimir Putin, and on his left, Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And look, just as saying, there had been some analysis and some speculation that as North Korea and Russia have drawn closer in recent months, and Kim Jong-un has sent troops to help Putin in Ukraine, there had been some speculation that China some of that. But look, none of that's on show today. Absolutely, they have these three leaders in lockstep together. And I think that sends a very striking message to the world at this particular junction in history, with the war in Ukraine raging and with Donald Trump kind of on the international stage as he is. But look, Xi Jinping to China, that display of allegiance, the power of allegiance, very, very much important in terms of underlining the political heft that he also wanted to be on show here today.
Yeah, well, as this parade, Helen Ann, wraps up, it was a short speech by President Xi, but he said it's important that nations look after each other and help each other and avoid a repetition of tragedy. That won't be lost, will it, on the fact that he had these key world leaders next to him?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important, actually, because, look, it's worth saying that one of the themes that China's really been pushing in the run-up to this is, of course, 80 years ago, when the Second World War came to an end, almost immediately off the back of the formation of the UN. And China has really pushed the message in recent days about its role as a preserver of global peace, as its role as a member of the UN, and it's all part of it sort of projecting itself forward for the coming years about could future be a different
Yeah, I'm sorry, Helen, I think we're breaking up there. Clearly, we're on a phone line, so struggling to come through. But as you're watching these pictures now, this is at the parade that has just taken place, a huge victory parade marking 80 years since Japan was defeated in Second World War, the Chinese People's War of Resistance, Beijing says, against Japanese aggression. And we heard a short speech from President Xi, which we'll be able to hear more of a little later. It culminated with the release of peace doves and lots of balloons, as you can see all this equipment and the vehicles, the armour being used, or that would be used in the future. Before President Xi spoke, ceremony began with an 80-gun artillery salute to mark the 80 years since the end of the war, followed by the national anthem. The March of the Volunteers, that was composed in 1935 during the early years of resistance against invading Japanese forces. Well, back to our US correspondent right now, Mark Stone. Donald Trump, quick to get his thoughts in, as he must surely have watched what I guess Washington can only have imagined what might have happened their side. His parade not quite on this extravagant, spectacular along those lines, is it, Mark?
No, and he always said that he always projected his parade that happened, when was it? The beginning of the summer, that it would be on a scale like this, and clearly it never was going to be. I guess that's a false equivalence, really, that they were never going to be the same, that the difference is huge. For me, looking at these pictures, Nick, what's really interesting, and I was based in China for 4 years, about 10 years ago now, and you can just see how far the country has come in such a short space of time. I mean, everything you're looking at here is Chinese made, all the hardware, whether it be the tanks, the jeeps, the limousine that Xi Jinping traveled in as he inspected the troops. All of that is Chinese made, and that's new. You know, a decade ago, those tanks would have been, some of them would have been Chinese. They wouldn't have been very sophisticated. Some of them would have been old Soviet tanks. Now, everything there, the goggles, the helmets, the lot, it's all Chinese made, and that is intentional. When I was based in China, you used to see a lot of the cars driving around the city were German. They were German cars made in China, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, all of them had factories in China. Nowadays, that's phased out. Cars are Chinese, proudly Chinese. And I think that's really important to note, that this has become a wholly Chinese sort of enterprise. And that's massively important for the Chinese. And there's a parallel too, because of course what Donald Trump wants to do in America is make everything American again. So there's an interesting parallel there. The vehicle that you can see Xi Jinping traveling in, it's a Chinese-made limousine. What's also interesting, Nick, is that the hardware on show, some of it, as Helen Ann was alluding to, it has not been seen before. A few moments ago, I got a glimpse of a massive missile system that was being driven through Tiananmen Square. That's the DF-61, which is an intercontinental ballistic missile, a massive new bit of kit that the Chinese have got. Now, who knows whether it actually works? We don't know. But the fact is, they are proud enough to show these things off. There's clearly a weird irony going on, that they are projecting peace with the balloons and all the rest of it at the same point as they are showing all this hardware, military might, war fighting machines through the streets. Again, I guess it's the Chinese equivalent of what Donald Trump says is peace through strength. That is Trump's sort of mantra. The Chinese will have something very similar, no doubt. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if you caught this, but you could see some of the soldiers there were wearing what looked to me like pale blue United Nations berets, those peacekeeping berets. So there's another message that Xi Jinping is trying to project, that he is somehow the responsible world leader, that he is, part of the United Nations, a member of the Security Council. The message here from the Chinese, whether you take it as at face value or whether you think it's ludicrous, is that they, the Chinese, are the responsible, stable world power. In contrast, they would see it to the sort of chaos coming out of America right now.
And from what you seem to be suggesting, Mark, that Xi Jinping is styling himself or comparing himself, rivaling Donald Trump. There are some clear comparisons there.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely, that's what he's trying to do. And also, remember that not all that long ago, China was the country that would always say, it's sort of the central pillar of Chinese foreign policy is not to interfere in the domestic affairs of other nations. That was always what they would say. I don't think that is true anymore. I think now China sort of implicitly or explicitly is very much wanting to project its power beyond its borders. Now, clearly, as you were talking to with your guest from Russia, in the first instance, the priority for China is Taiwan, and many of these weapons that you're seeing here, the anti-ship missiles that they've been parading through the streets, the fighter jets as well. These this is the equipment that they would use if, some would say when, they make a move on Taiwan. And it's a long game that Xi Jinping is playing here. He doesn't have to worry about elections. He doesn't have to worry about, opinion polls. And as you said, he's changed the constitution to the extent that there is one in China to make sure that he now can be potentially a leader for life. So he is playing a very, very long game here. And this message that they have shown in Tianjin with the summit and now with this extraordinary military parade is one of yes, domestic dominance over their people, but also of global dominance too. It's quite a statement coming out of Beijing at the moment, and as I said at the beginning, to be a fly on the wall of the White House right now would be quite something.
Well, you're well versed, of course, Mark, where you are now in Washington and having been in Beijing to talk for both. I'm interested now if there is this one-upmanship or attempt at it, where it goes from here between these two men and what happens in the future.
Well, I mean, honestly, goodness knows. I mean, it's hard enough trying to work out American foreign policy under Trump day by day, because it does appear to oscillate. So I don't know, but I think that there is obviously a deep rivalry, but I don't think there is any desire by either side for it to spiral. At the moment, this is an economic conflict, and that much is very, very clear by the tariff war that has been ongoing for some time now. But for me, Nick, the really difficult question to answer is what happens if Xi Jinping decides to make a move on Taiwan. How will the American president react? And it's very, very hard to know whether he would decide that was a line crossed, or whether he would just look the other way and just say, well, not our problem.
All right, well, we'll certainly see how it all pans out, won't we? Mark, for now, many thanks indeed. Mark Stone there.